So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's masterclass hosted by FamilyOfficeList.org. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I'm Danielle Patterson, CEO at Family Office List, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's episode. Our guest is Ron Diamond, who I feel needs no introduction, but he is the founder and chairman of Diamond Wealth and one of the most respected thought leaders in the family office space. And I'm very excited for the questions we have lined up today and hope everyone will participate in our conversation. Here is a little bit about Ron so you can learn more. He's the founder and chairman of Diamond Wealth, a syndicate for over 100 family offices ranging in size from 250 million to 30 billion. For the past 20 years, Ron has been working alongside these family offices, investing exclusively in private markets, including private equity, real estate, venture capital, and more. Ron is also the founder, host, and CEO of Family Office World Media, a leading platform for family offices to collaborate, innovate, and access valuable resources. In addition to his work with Diamond Wealth, Ron serves as the Chicago and Family Office Chair for Tiger 21, a premier peer membership organization for ultra-high net worth individuals. Throughout his career, Ron has been deeply involved in strategic advisory roles, and he serves on the advisory board and steering committee for the University of Chicago Booth School for Business Family Office Initiative. And he's also worked with the Aspen Institute, advising family offices on investment strategies. Ron's insights are recognized worldwide. He is a TEDx speaker and a LinkedIn top voice, sharing his expertise through global speaking engagements. And his background also includes founding Pinnacle Capital, a hedge fund that outperformed the S&P 500 for a decade. So Ron's expertise at the intersection of family offices, philanthropy, and innovation has made him a thought leader that many of us in the industry rely on for advice. And as you can see, he holds a wealth of knowledge and experience. So we are very fortunate to have this opportunity to spend an hour with him and to learn from his wisdom. Before we dive into today's session, just a few quick housekeeping notes. I think everyone has discovered that the chat is enabled. Feel free to network, introduce yourselves in the chat. You know, we have an amazing community, and I'm very grateful to all of you for being here with us today. And then, so that questions don't get lost, please, the Q&A management, the session is designed to be interactive and engaging, which is why we make them live. So I encourage everyone to contribute your questions, just drop them in the Q&A so they don't get buried in our chat. I have a ton of notes prepared, but again, I'd love to include you all, so we'll make time for Q&A throughout and at the very end. So with that, let's get started. Ron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Great to see you.
Yes, it's an honor. You know, I've heard you speak. I've been following your work, listening to your podcast, learning from you for years, and I just really appreciate your sharing your wisdom with our community. So I've been looking forward to this, and I'd love to kind of start it in the early years. So Ron, I've heard you speak, and I know that family has played a big role in your journey. You've mentioned your father's influence in the past, and I know he was in banking, and he wrote a book called Leverage Buyouts and had a real impact on your path. Can you tell us a bit about what growing up was like? And I'm curious if your family always lived in the Chicagoland area.
Yeah, well, first, it's great to be here, and congratulations on what you've done, because you've really built a wonderful community yourself. Yeah, I grew up in Highland Park, which is a suburb outside of Chicago. Two brothers, very, very close family. Incredible mom, incredible dad. My dad was kind of my hero, my role model. Unfortunately, he developed prostate cancer when he was 52, and he passed it when he was 57. So it's played a significant role in my life. But I spent most of my time out here. I graduated from Northwestern, moved out to New York, and worked at Drexel Burnham when Drexel existed, and then I was there when they imploded. We could talk more about that because that was a very surreal scene.
Yeah.
And then I moved back to Chicago, and now I'm married for 28 years, have two beautiful daughters, 24 and 21, and have a 10-month-old puppy named Percy.
Oh, that is a piece of information I didn't know. Will we possibly see an appearance in the background or?
No, I I'm not permitted to have him here.
We have, you'll notice I have closed curtains, closed doors. We also have, it's about 11-month-old puppy. So on occasion, they've been known to break into my office. But and so I love your storytelling. I love your interviews. In a past interview, I heard you tell a story where you called a friend or a colleague of your dad's for an internship and it didn't really go as planned. Can you tell us a bit more about that story?
Well, yeah, and it still resonates with me because it's one of these things that just it still bothers me. So it was a simple thing. I was a freshman at Northwestern University. I was looking to do an internship, which means I was looking to work for somebody for free. I called one of my dad's friend, we'll call him Mr. M.
Yes.
And I said, Mr. M, this is Ron Diamond, my dad, Steven, and I'd love to do an internship, and I was a little bit nervous. It was the first time I'd ever done this. And there's a pause on the phone, and then the next thing out of his mouth is, "Does your dad know you're calling me?" And I'm like, "No, why?" He's like, "Well, I'm going to let him know." And then I got on the defensive, and I didn't know had I done something wrong. 'Cause this is my first time doing it, and he made me feel like 2 feet tall. And he, what the takeaway from that was everybody starts somewhere, even Mr. M. And
Yeah.
my takeaway, I would always pay it forward because again, everybody starts from somewhere. And how badly he made me feel, I would never, under any circumstances, ever make anybody feel that way. So I try as best I can to pay it forward. I'm involved in a bunch of university issues, but I think it's really important. But yeah, it was a horrible phone call, but one I could still remember.
So impactful, and it really, I can see the way that it has shaped you on, because you've been a mentor of mine and so giving and generous. So I I hate that that happened to you, but I love that you took something negative and turned it into a positive way of moving forward. So I'm curious to know, I mean, we can talk about Drexel Burnham and really kind of what happened there and what it was like. I know you were really young at the time, but can you tell us a bit about that experience? And
Yeah,
yeah, and I can
it
only
was
imagine.
it was my first job, so it was a very welcome to the real world experience.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember, what's interesting is, and kind of where we are with family offices, is before I got the job at Drexel, my father was a very successful banker at First National Bank of Chicago, and I was I had just gotten offered the job at Drexel, and at the time, Drexel was the most profitable firm on Wall Street. If you got a job at Drexel, you take a job at
Amazing.
Drexel.
Yeah.
And my dad said, there's a guy who works with me in the bank, and he's doing some really innovative things, and I think you should meet with him. Now I'm 21 years old. I said, well, Dad, I've got a job at Drexel. I'm all good, and I want to meet with him. And what was interesting is that the person he wanted me to meet with was in doing something called leveraged buyouts.
Mm,
Now, which was a precursor to private equity. And so I didn't know what was happening. And my dad wrote a book. He wrote a book called Leveraged Buyouts at the time, which I had no clue what that was about. Fast forward 2 years later, Drexel Burnham implodes. I'm in the room when Fred Joseph, the CEO, says we're going bankrupt. Now, I didn't have a lot of stock options. I just lost a good job. But I'm
yeah.
looking at people in their 60s and 70s and some older, and typically men didn't cry in the late 80s. They
Yeah.
certainly did there. And I remember the woman with big green glasses. I remember I could remember scents. And it was a surreal scene that's imprinted on me. And my takeaway from that was that I would always be like extremely loyal to people, but I would
Yes.
never, ever, ever be loyal to a company. Because if
Yeah.
this is my first job, and if this could happen to Drexel, and then you fast forward, it can happen to Bear Stearns, it can happen to Lehman Brothers,
Yeah.
et cetera. And when that happened, I learned what leveraged buyouts were, which was private equity. The person that I refused to meet with was John Canning, who started Madison Dearborn, and private equity became a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And what's interesting is, fast forward, 35 years, I, I think is private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets in the mid 80s. And again, I didn't even know what it was at the time.
Right.
I think we're at an inflection point, and we're starting to see family offices not overtake, but certainly disrupt the private equity and venture capital models, because many of these private equity and venture capital firms, it's become an AUM game. And
Yeah.
so I think while that 35 years ago, that transition took place, I think we're at an inflection point right now. And I just think it's an extremely exciting time. We're maybe in the second inning in the evolution of family offices.
That is, I mean, what an exciting time to be in the industry and to watch it unfold in real time. Wow. So, I mean, even hearing you recount the story of what it felt like being in the room as, the CEO announced the closing of the company. I mean, I get goosebumps, and what an experience. Again, you took that moment and you let it shape, the way that you see the world moving forward. And thank you for, yeah, sharing that wisdom with us. So after, I'm really curious to know, you went on to launch a hedge fund, Pinnacle Capital, which was $250 million, and it outperformed the S&P index, for 10 years straight. Like, how did you go into that? And, I'm curious to know about your early investors and if they were family offices, and really like how you approached starting a hedge fund and what fundraising was like back then.
Well, remember, I had no intention. I didn't consider myself an entrepreneur. I certainly didn't consider myself a risk taker.
Yeah.
My plan was just to work at Drexel, and if it worked out, they took 10 kids from different schools, and hopefully we'd run a division one day, or maybe run the company one day. Um, but that all changed. And so I came back very disillusioned. Um,
Yeah.
and I started a hedge fund without really knowing what I was doing, which is, I think, true with a lot of entrepreneurs. You just kind of learn. And we didn't start with 250 million. We started with $2 million just from friends and family.
Amazing.
And
Yeah.
ended up growing it. But I made a ton of mistakes. And I was in way over my head. But if I didn't take that risk, I wouldn't have done, like, if I completely thought it through, I would have never done it. So I think that's true with a lot of entrepreneurs. You just
Yes.
you dive in, you have a passion to do something, and then you figure it out along the way. So, we were also very lucky. We in the 90s, it wasn't that hard to make money in the public stock markets. I mean,
Mhm.
had I run my fund in a different decade, I certainly wouldn't have done nearly as well. So I'm
Yeah.
smart enough to know that I wasn't that smart, that there was tailwinds behind me.
Yeah.
And in 2000, I thought the market was a little bit overvalued.
Hmm.
And again, we were a hedge fund, but we were pretty good stock pickers, but we weren't really hedged. And if the market went down, we would have lost money. So
Yeah.
I went out to my clients and I said, I'm gonna sell my firm to a market neutral firm. So if the market goes up or down, they'll do fine. I sold it to them. I stayed on board for 6 months and kept 100% of the money on board. And then I, I got my liquidity, and then I left and started investing. But that's kind of how it started. But I had zero intention. If you would have asked me 3 years ago when I was at Northwestern, would I start a hedge fund?
Yeah.
There'd be a 0.0% chance.
Well, again, another amazing example of your resilience and making, lemonade out of lemons. And I mean, it is really humbling to hear you say that you felt like in over your head and it was not
I
something
was in the
really.
there is no reason for me that I should have started that hedge fund. But
But congratulations. I mean, absolutely amazing journey. And, so when you think back to those early investors, you raised 2 million from friends and family. But as you went on and grew it to 250 million, were you working with family offices? Did they even call themselves family offices at that point?
no, in the 90s, they used to call them rich people. And now they call them family offices. So that's kind of how I got into the family office space, because a lot of the investors that invested with me, and we did do fairly well. When I started investing, I didn't even know what the term family office was in the 90s.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started investing. I put together a syndicate of a bunch of former clients and some people that they referred me to. And that's kind of how I got started. And that's how I kind of learned about the family office market. But
Yeah.
what was amazing to me was intuitively, you would think that, okay, if somebody's worth $5 billion, by definition, they're very sophisticated. Or you would think that the level of wealth and the level of sophistication, there's a direct correlation. It's not always the case. And the problem right now is, I always say we're kind of in the second inning in the evolution of family offices.
Yes.
It's very fragmented. It's very siloed. It's very inefficient. 85 to 90% of family offices that exist, in my opinion, should not exist in the way in which they currently exist. And the model doesn't work because only 25% of families make it to the second generation, 10 make it to the third, and 5 make it to the fourth. But let's look at the amount of money we're dealing with. There's currently $10 trillion in capital. And to put that in perspective, there's 6.5 trillion globally in the entire hedge fund universe. So the family office universe is larger than the entire universe of hedge funds. But what's even more interesting is that over the next 20 years, we are about to experience the largest transfer of wealth in history. There's $115 trillion that's moving downstream from the baby boomers to the next gen. It'll be the largest transfer of wealth ever. So this family office market will be larger than private equity and venture capital. So now you've got huge amounts of money in what I'd call, in general, inefficient hands, not all, but in general. And what we need to do as an industry is really get it to the next level, to institutionalize it, to professionalize it. And I think we're getting there, and I see it happening. But it's interesting because my world is changing on a daily basis.
Amazing. I mean, literally real time. I mean, what an amazing opportunity ahead, and for you to be in the middle of it. Um, oh yeah, I'm excited to learn more and dive into the Booth Initiative. But before we do, something I love so much about your work is you talk a lot about the intersection of prosperity and purpose. And I just kind of wanted to learn more for maybe audience that hasn't heard you talk about that. What does that mean to you?
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, I did a podcast with David Rubenstein, and he made a comment. He's like, the pharaohs tried to bury themselves with their money, and that didn't really work out so well. And it's at some point, enough. When is enough enough? And I think that you get to be a point in life where you do feel compelled to do something. I mean, I've I was very fortunate. I wasn't born with money, but I was born with a loving family. And I was
Yeah.
born with supporting parents and loving brothers. And I was born into a family that stressed education. So even though I wasn't born on second base from a financial standpoint, um, I had a home run as far as how I was raised and what was
Yeah.
instilled in me. So I felt very, very fortunate. And I realized that it's very important to figure out ways to give back. And
Yeah.
it makes me feel good. And I think a lot of people in the family office world, and that's kind of my North Star, and we could talk about that a little later. I think that I don't think it's a panacea, but a lot of family offices, my father passed from prostate cancer at 57. When my first boss was Michael Milken. When Michael Milken developed prostate cancer, what he did, my dad went to 3 or 4 different doctors, got a second, third, fourth opinion, and unfortunately he passed away 4 years later. What Milken did was he got the same diagnosis as my dad, but he built it like a venture capital firm. So he put 250,000 here, 2 million here, 3 million here. And as a result of Michael Milken, most men will die with, but not of, prostate cancer. And then fast forward 30 years, Bill Gates. Um, Whatever you think of him, I would argue he did more for COVID than the US government.
Yeah.
Eric Lefkowski, his wife, he's the founder of Groupon. His wife got breast cancer. So he didn't like the diagnosis, he didn't like the data. He started a company called, which turned into be Tempest, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, not to make money, but to solve a problem. So kind of my North Star is
Yeah.
you can't run a philanthropy exactly like a business, but I do believe with the amount of money that you're seeing and with the
Yeah.
amount of passion that these have, everyone's passionate about something. They've been touched by autism, they've been touched by cancer or whatever it is. Um, it's not going to come from the government. It's not going to come from the corporate sector. And I do believe that family offices, again, it's not a panacea, but I do believe they're going to solve a lot of these real world problems. Sergey Brin has a predisposition for pancreatic cancer. He's donated $1 billion. Is he going to solve it? I have no clue, but I'd put my money on him over the American Cancer Society.
Right. It is so inspiring, and just to see the impact and the opportunity for change. And I admire you, Ron, for, you know, that legacy of love that your parents instilled in you, and now you see it in, you know, the work that you do for education and giving back. And it's just so encouraging. So speaking of education and your love for, you know, philanthropy and giving back, I would love to talk about the Family Office Initiative at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. So I know years earlier, before COVID, you know, you had launched the Stanford Global Family Office Initiative, and I'd love to know, you know, how what you're doing is different, and then also, you know, who is it for? Is it for students, the actual family offices, everyone? Tell us, you know, who the program's designed for and how people can get involved.
Yeah, well, right now it's kind of the most exciting thing that I'm working on.
Yeah.
So about 7 years, I chaired the Disruptive Technology Center, the advisory board at Stanford. And this is maybe right before COVID started, so maybe 5 years ago. I said, let's put together a family office initiative at Stanford. And my thought process was pretty simple, that I ended up keynoting a lot of these family office conferences. And the investors that invest alongside me, you know, they'll say, I see your keynoting, should I come to this conference? And my response is no. And the problem is that there are a few good conferences, but most of them, they're pay to play. And it's not a good use of people's time to go, in my opinion. So I wanted to create something that I would tell the investors that invest alongside me, you should go to this conference. So what I did is we put together a conference. Now, this is during COVID.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't want to put together a conference. It was not my skill set, and I didn't want to do that kind of work. So I went to Kirkland and Ellis, and I went to Ryan Harris, who runs the family office practice for Kirkland and Ellis. And I went to Bobby Stover, who runs the family office practice for EY. I said, look, here's what I want to do. Here's my vision. You guys do all the legwork. I'll do two things. I will get you world-class speakers, and I'll pick the content that family offices want to hear about, because I know what family offices want to hear about.
Awesome.
I said, fine. So I'll give you 3 examples. We had the first call I made was to Paul Carbone, who's become a good friend. Paul runs the family office for Tony and JB Pritzker. Paul was talking about the funnel. This is how they do diligence. This is how they get 1,000 ideas, it goes to 50, whatever, and it goes down, and how they do due diligence. He wasn't pitching a fund. All he was saying is, this is how we do due diligence at Pritzker, period.
So valuable. Yeah.
Second, Tim Callahan, who's a friend. He was Sam Zell's partner. Now, remember, this is during COVID, right? So he was very successful in offices. Now, people didn't know if people would ever come back to offices.
Yeah.
He wasn't pitching raising Fund 5. He wasn't raising any money. He was simply opining on what he thought was going to happen to the office market, because during COVID, people didn't know if people would ever come back to offices.
Yeah.
So he was just giving, from a very thoughtful standpoint, his perspective. And then last example was Denise Illich, who's a good friend. The family owns Little Caesars.
Yeah.
And, they own a couple sports teams. She, along with Dan Gilbert, literally almost single-handedly, the family rebuilt Detroit. And what she was talking about was, she wasn't on there asking people to donate to her philanthropy, to donate, to give to Detroit, to make Detroit better. She was just saying, look, if you're going to be philanthropic, no matter what your cause is, you need to run it more like a business. And here's what we did wrong. Here's what we did right. So it was just simply, there was no agenda. We had 880 families from 6 continents on a Zoom call during COVID.
Wow.
Over 425, over $1 billion. So that was sort of like tenfold what Kirkland and EY was expecting.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. That is,
well, don't congratulate
me yet. So COVID.
Okay,
keep going.
Fast forward.
Yes.
John Doerr donates $1.5 billion for the school of sustainability. I didn't. Everything I did kind of had to report into him. It got political, and I didn't need that. So 3 years ago, I'm having lunch with Michael Milken, who was my first boss, and Steve Kaplan, who runs the top professor at Booth.
Right.
And I said to Steve, I'd love to do this at Booth. It's getting political at Stanford, and I don't need the politics. And within a second, he's like, done. So that was sort of like the impetus. And then I brought over a couple of people that I had on the board at Stanford over to Booth. So
Yes.
we announced it. We started planning it. So I'm spearheading it along with Paul Carbone, who runs the Family for Tony J.B. Pritzker. We've got Steve Kaplan, who's sort of our inside guy, helping us navigate everything. We have Professor Heaton teaching a course right now. We put together 40 family offices. These are, $5 billion AUM families,
Incredible.
from the largest families, on our advisory board. And the goal is basically this. You've got so much money in general, such inefficient hands in general, that you have to do something. And these conferences don't work
Right.
in general. So how are you going to do it? So I could have done it with Northern Trust, but again, they have an agenda. They still want you to deposit money into their accounts.
Right.
The only one that doesn't have an agenda truly is academia,
Yeah.
is institution, universities. And
Yeah.
what's their agenda? Their agenda is research and education.
Yeah.
So so I'm doing this. I think that we're really in an inflection point, and what we need to do as an industry is we need to institutionalize and professionalize this. There's so much we have to do. We've got to get the governance right. I mean, what happens
Yeah.
now is somebody has a liquidity event, and the first thing they do is they start investing. Usually,
Yeah.
their friends come around and ask them for money, and their friends are smart, so they invest.
Yeah.
That's not the first thing you should do. The first thing you should do is talk to an estate planning attorney, which is sort of like the foundation of a house. Once you get that done, then you need to work on governance. So it's
Mm.
kind of backwards, and there's no model right now because this is very new.
Yeah.
68% of the family offices that exist today started since 2000, half started since 2008. So this is a very new industry, very
Very.
fragmented, very siloed, very inefficient. The model doesn't work. We're trying to get that right. We're trying to change that.
Well, I love that you are building the solution in real time. It's unfolding. It will be really exciting to see where that leads the industry in the years to come. And for the classes, I went online to see what's entailed. Are those virtual and are they open to the general public, or do you have to be enrolled? Yeah.
No, we wanted to do it. We wanted to do it you had to be a student at University of Chicago Booth and be getting your MBA, an actual
Got it.
student. And we had classes at the school, at the university. I
I
taught
mean,
one of the classes. But it was a full credit course, and
mhm.
basically we wanted to educate them because look, today the top kids out of Booth or Kellogg or Stanford or Wharton or
Okay.
you name the top business school, what do they want to do? They want to get into private equity, venture
Mhm.
capital, real estate, maybe hedge funds, things like that. Nobody wants to go into a family office. Nobody knows what a family office is. I believe that I could be wrong year wise, but I think directionally I'm correct. In 3 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 7 years, that working for a family office is going to be the first choice of these kids coming out of the schools. Right
Yeah.
now, they don't even consider it an option. And when I
Yeah.
announced what we're doing at Booth, MIT, I mean, there were a whole bunch of different schools that called, and they're going to do something as well. So while
Incredible.
this is the first, I don't expect it to be the last, and that's fine. I think it's great, and I think that's how it has to happen. So that was the
Absolutely.
evolution of how that took place.
Well, congratulations being the trailblazer, and yeah, it will be neat to see other universities catch on. So congratulations. Well, you spoke about the great wealth transfer, and I just want to kind of reflect on this for a moment more and geek out on the data because it's huge. I mean, we keep hearing about it, but the numbers keep growing. So I know it was previously forecasted at 84 trillion, and just recently it was 105 trillion. But now I believe it's projected that through 2048 the total will be 124 trillion. And what really blew my mind is that 105 trillion is expected to flow to heirs, but 18 trillion will go to charity, and nearly 100 trillion will be transferred from the baby boomers to older generations, which represents 81% of all transfers. So I'm curious to hear from you, Ron. When you hear these figures and they're growing, do you think this latest updated figure and data is accurate, and do you anticipate it to grow even further?
The second part of your question is yes. I think directionally it's accurate. It's very hard to say I mean, they say the number, how much money is in family offices? 10 trillion. It's not an exact science. You can't go to for private equity and venture capital. You can go to PitchBook and look at the top 100 venture capital firms. Look at the
Right.
top private equity. They don't have that for family offices. They say roughly there's 15,000 family offices throughout the world. I think directionally that's probably pretty close. Um, but there's a lot of people, who will call themselves family offices and maybe shouldn't be a family office. And then the other question is, how much money do you need to have a family office?
Yes.
So there's a lot of
I'm
people who have a
curious about
liquidity
that.
event, and they might have a liquidity event and sell their company for $100 million, which is a tremendous amount of money, but it's not near enough to have a family office. In order for it to make economic sense, to have a dedicated family office. If you're going to invest in the private markets and vet direct deals, you probably need about $500 million. Anything short of that, you're better off going to a multifamily office, because if you do the math and reverse engineer it, rather than paying your own accountant, your own lawyer, your own admin, your own team, your own deal team, you split that cost with 20 other families. So anywhere between 10 million up to 3, 4, 500 million, that's really where the multifamily offices come in. Once you get to a level at $500 million, then you could start thinking about putting a single family office together. But you have to get it right, and you have to figure out ways to structure it. You have to compensate in order to get the right team, in order to compete with the Carlyles and the Blackstones and the KKRs. You need to have the right team, and in order to have the right team, you need to compensate them. So we have got to get the compensation model right, and that's right now it's way lagging behind.
100%. I mean, and I think that's too what some people forget is you make your wealth, you have your exit, but running a family office is a complete business of its own.
It's a full-time thing, and a lot of people think I've had a liquidity event, now I'm gonna start to take my foot off the pedal and have a family office. Well, first of all, I don't judge anybody on anything, so
Right.
do whatever you want. But if that's your rationale, don't start a family office, because if you don't run it like a business, it's not gonna work.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, you're seeing a lot of people do that. I mean, what happened was post-crash, pre-COVID, a lot of these family offices wanted to do direct deals. They
Yes.
wanted to do direct deals because why should I pay 220 if I can make money? And post crash, pre COVID, I don't care what you invested in, it made money. Private equity, venture capital, real estate, Bitcoin, the stock market, everything went up. So families bypassed a lot of these private equity and venture capital firms. But then, about 3 years ago, they started jacking up interest rates. And what happened? Now you had a lot of these families that were not only not making money, they were losing money. And as a result of that, Carter did a study where the average Series B was down 50%, Series C was down 75%. As a result of that, family offices now are starting to lose money on a real-time basis. And I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a pushback. And how I think it's going to play out is the large, sophisticated family offices will get larger, and they'll become household names. So right now, David Rubenstein's family office is called Declaration Partners. Nobody's heard of the name Declaration Partners. Everyone knows Carlyle. That's his private
Right.
equity fund. Um, he thinks, and I agree with him because we talked about this on the podcast, that in 5 to 7 years, Declaration Partner will be as well known as a KKR or a Blackstone or a Carlyle. So I think what's going to happen is the big families are going to get bigger and
Yeah.
going to come even more institutionalized. The smaller family offices, many of them will morph into multifamily offices.
Yeah.
And I think you're just going to see a tremendous opportunity for people to come in, and you're any industry that's fragmented, siloed, and inefficient, whether it's family offices or making widgets, it's a good business in general from a macro standpoint to be in, and that's where we are. So my world is changing almost on a daily basis, and it's exciting because I know in 10 years, if we have another call like this,
Yeah.
the calls can be completely different, and people will know what a family office is and
Yeah.
and think much differently about it.
Well, I look forward to those conversations. I hope we can hold them every year. Um, so I'm curious to hear from you, Ron, because I know, you are co-investing right alongside so many families. You've been in the space now. I'd love to know what are some of the more exciting or impactful family office-led investments that you've witnessed in your career.
A ton. I mean, I'm dealing with the wealthiest people in the world. These are 250 million to 30 billion. So I see a lot. And one of the things that the large family offices do if you look at the most successful large family, the Pritzker, Paul Carbone is certainly an example of it. A lot of them, where do they make their money? In lower middle market private equity, right? And the reason that they do that, it's a very lucrative area for lower middle market. Once you get above the lower middle market, then you get the institutions. The problem right now is that, let's say you are a family office is looking to do a direct deal. Let's say you're a garage door manufacturer in Des Moines, Iowa. Previously, you had two options if you wanted to sell the company. Previously, you could either sell it to a strategic, and the strategic typically might have been your enemy or your biggest competitor, and there was, bad blood between you guys, or private equity. Those are your two options: a strategic. Family office now offers a third option, right? So now you could sell it to a third place. The problem right now, and why I think this is going to be so disruptive, is if you look at the model, a private equity firm, when they buy that garage door manufacturer, I could tell you when they buy it, when they're going to sell it, because
Yeah.
I know how the private equity people are compensated. It doesn't make them bad people. It's just that's how they're compensated.
Model.
They're going to
Yeah.
sell it in 4 to 5 years. So what's going to happen is they're going to sell it in 4 to 5 years, and then what's going to happen? Not always, but typically they'll sell it to private equity firm two. Private equity firm two, I could tell how long they're going to hold it for, probably about 3, 4, 5 years. And then they're going to sell it to private equity firm three. And if
Yeah.
you look over the course of 20 years, if you look at the taxes, the
Oh, yeah.
friction,
The
the
legal
disruption
piece.
in business
Yeah.
versus a family office who could simply buy it, hold it for 20 years, and let it compound, the results aren't even close.
Yeah.
So this family office model objectively is a superior model. The problem is only very, very few family offices can execute right now.
Hmm.
And part of the reason is they're not attracting the top talent. So one of the problems that the industry has is right now, I'm generalizing, but
Yeah.
most family offices, if they pay a kid out of Stanford MBA $250,000, many of them look at that as a cost. In other words, this student's going to cost me $250,000. If Blackstone or Carlyle or KKR hires a kid and pays them 250,000, they look at that student as a potential $20 million profit center, not as a cost. It's not a cost center.
Just a
So
shift in how you
family
see.
offices have to learn to look like that. So we've got to get the compensation model right. The
Yeah.
only reason that Paul Carbone was a very successful private equity guy at Baird, he was doing extremely well. He would have never left and gone to work with Tony Pritzker. The only reason he was able to do it is because Tony figured out a way how to compensate him, to give him part of the carry and give him ways compensation model. So one of the first things we have to do as an industry is get the compensation model right.
Well, I love it. That's a clear path, and you're working on that solution now. So it does seem promising. I'm curious to know, many people are looking to partner with family offices for the exact reason you said. The model is better. You can, sustain the company culture if you're going to sell to a family office versus a private equity firm. And so for those looking to partner with family offices, I'm curious, like, how do you source your deals? And does cold outreach ever get your attention, or is it always through a trusted referral?
Well, it's unfortunately it's hard. It's hard right now because it is very siloed. And what family offices, look, if you're a family, you're entitled to be private. You don't have to share anything. But if you want to compete for deal flow, you have to share. So if you like to invest in early stage venture capital or multifamily real estate, you need to let the market know what you invest in so that when they have that deal, how do the smart people find the rich people and how do the rich people find the smart people? And right
Right,
now they don't.
right.
What I think is starting to happen, and again, we're at the very infancy of this, but that's what we're trying to create in Chicago, an ecosystem where the smart people know who the rich people are, the rich people know who the smart people are, and you can have, and it's much easier to get a hold of because right now I get hundreds of calls saying,
Yeah,
"Can you introduce me to a?" It doesn't work like that. I mean,
right.
I was, I'm at a point where, we get a lot of our deal flow directly from the family offices, but it's a fascinating time. And again, a lot of people want to get into it. But this is on family offices. Family offices have to open up and say, this is what we invest in. This is our average size check. We do need to be part of the GP or we don't. We do need a board seat or we don't. They need to do that more. And I think that's starting to happen. And that's one of the things we're teaching at Booth.
Well, that is so exciting to hear, and I admire the way you're really working to bridge that gap. I'm very encouraged by all the collaboration I see happening right now amongst other family offices and just, with the universities and great leaders. So I know, from a lot of your talks and talks that we've had, we talk about trust and, how that's step number one in building a relationship with family offices. But beyond trust, what is one piece of advice you would give to service providers who want to build long-term relationships with family offices?
Well, you brought up a really good point with trust. So the first, second, and third thing a family office wants to know when they're going to work with somebody is, can I trust you?
Mhm.
The fourth thing is, what's your track record, et cetera. That's flipped institutionally. The institutions, they want to know what's your 1, 3, 5 year track record, what's your biggest drawdown. Then they'll do a little diligence on you. This is a relationship business. A lot of the reason that these family offices exist, it's not that $10 trillion of capital wants to manage that kind of money. A lot of people stop trusting Wall Street, and justifiably. And as a result of that, people are managing that, they'd rather do it themselves. So they work with people. So the most important thing is that there's an element of trust that it transcends. It's more important than your actual track record. Because again, in a bull market or if something's going well, that's not really what families look for. They hope it does, but they want to know if something goes wrong, and almost inevitably something goes wrong in most investments at some point, how are they going to react? And are they going to do it in a thoughtful way? And that's what family offices need to do. So it has to do with trust and reputation.
I love that. Amazing answer. Yeah. Well, I literally have pages of questions and notes, but I know that this is live and the Q&A is really filling up. I know some people out of the corner of my eye have seen some Q&As go into chat, but if you want to put them into the Q&A, if you're all right with it, Ron, I think I'll move to questions from the audience just because that is the fun of making them live. I'd love to bring people into our conversation. So and hopefully there aren't, I'll try to skim over to make sure there's no repeats of things you've already answered. But Lloyd asks, what is the appetite for generational projects in the natural resources sector?
I'm not really qualified to answer that question.
Moving on, and that's fair. Someone anonymous asks, how is the ongoing 80 trillion wealth transfer impact existing family offices or the rate of new ones being created?
Now it's 124 trillion.
Exactly.
Gone up. Yeah, it's changed a lot. You're going to see a lot more people setting up family offices, but they're going to get it right. So
Yeah.
there's no playbook today. It's sort of like
Yeah.
you have a liquidity event, you start investing, that you've already invested, then you could talk to an estate planning attorney, but you should have done it the other way around. You haven't had governance. What is governance? They don't have a mission statement. So I think what's going to happen is there will be playbooks, and the playbook will be you have a liquidity event. For A, talk to an estate planning attorney. B, talk to somebody in governance. C, I tell people don't invest probably for 6 months, maybe even 12 months. Now, yeah, you're going to miss out on a great deal, maybe 2 great deals. It's fine. You need to get the structure right. It's like the foundation of a house. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, no, that's really, really great advice. And I'm just reminding everyone to enter your questions in the Q&A only because I don't want to miss them. And I see a lot being put in the chat. Yeah, it's just amazing to see the growth and to see that playbook, start to form, and hopefully we'll see those failure rates, come down. Mahir asks, what could you advise on next generation involvement to family offices and how can we make it effective? You kind of spoke a bit to that.
That's a great question. And again, that's really the key. With 124 trillion moving downstream, what family office industry needs to do is educate the next gen. And how do you do that? And there's no silver bullet. There's no right answer. And you're dealing. It's also psychology. It's not just a question of who's the smartest of the 3, 4 kids. You've got psychology. You've got emotions, and there's so many different variables when you're dealing with moving money from G1 to G2 or G2 to G3. And it's very hard. And a lot of, I've seen a lot of families implode, not necessarily because of bad investment, some have, but from lack of governance and from lack of succession. And family offices in general don't have the succession right. They don't have the governance right. There's
Mhm.
a guy named Richard Wolkowitz, who top guy, at least in my opinion, and who does just all he does is governance for family offices. And he had a very successful family office until it imploded, and it imploded because of bad governance. So again, people like that, I think you're going to
Yeah.
start to see more and more.
I do love seeing, people in family offices take their own learning experiences and create the solutions based on that, and it's amazing. Yeah. Um, let's see. Jennifer Taylor asks us, given family offices, is there room for emerging small funds, given mismatched AUM and the buying power?
Um, Challenging question. I think that right now there's a lot of people, because private equity has been such a profitable business in the past. I mean, it's created trillions of dollars. Um, I think you see a ton of private equity firms out there, a ton of venture capital firms out there. One of the things that I'm seeing that's really innovative is something I'm going to call structural alpha. And structural alpha is not creating a better hedge fund or a private equity fund. It's how everything is structured. So
Mhm.
I give you a couple examples. Um, there's something called PPLI, which is private placement life insurance. So Michael Leapskin, probably the top guy doing this. Um, it's applicable to a very small percentage of people, but basically it's a tax wrapper. So if you basically invest in a credit fund, um, it's 10%, but after taxes, it's 7%. Here, you can make it for 50 bips, you eliminate the taxes. That's structural alpha. Probably the most innovative thing that I've seen in the past 20 years. There's a firm that I know well. I went to Northwestern with one of the founders called AQR, and they've created a tax aware strategy, which is a superior product. Tax loss harvesting started with parametrics and Imperial. They've taken that and grown it on steroids.
Oh,
And
wow.
so again, it's structural alpha that is really, to me, what's revolutionary. Not this is the greatest new private equity deal. This is the greatest, because the structural alpha, how you're doing it, um, the wealthiest of the families that we work with, the person they're closest with is the estate planning attorney, not necessarily the guy that manages the money. And this is all structural alpha. I was talking with Patrick McCurry, who's probably the top income tax planning attorney in the country. And he was like a kid in a candy store. He's like, I've never seen anything like this in 20 years. This is referring to what AQR is doing. Because what you're seeing happening is now how things are structured is how people are making money, not necessarily picking a better way to make widgets. So it's really interesting where we're at now.
That is fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, that's new to me. So this was earlier in the session. Ollie shares, today we see family offices directly investing in companies, PEVC. And I think you spoke to this earlier, Ron, but they say, well, single family offices join hands to form their own funds. Will a group of family offices create their own team of fund managers, investment managers, legal advisors, essentially have their own single family offices, but participate in a multifamily office? And the final question is, what should one expect to see in the third and fourth innings in the evolution of family offices? And I know you spoke about, the single family office model and the multi, but yeah, interesting to see if they're going to be creating their own funds.
I
If
think, yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think the big family offices are going to get bigger. I think the smaller family offices are going to morph into the multifamily offices. I think the family offices, look, if you start a family office and you made your money in real estate, you should focus on real estate and outsource the rest of that. I mean, because you made your money, Ty Warner was a brilliant businessman, and he created Beanie Babies, and it did extraordinarily well. It doesn't mean he has the ability to buy the Four Seasons Hotel, and that was a disaster.
yes.
So ego, the biggest obstacle to many of these founders of these family offices, truthfully, is ego. And just because you're good at something, I'm good at a couple things. I'm really bad
Right.
at a lot of things.
Yeah.
Just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're good at everything. And I think that once you get the ego out of the equation, and I think that's going to happen as some of these families start taking losses in some of these deals. So I think that's going to happen.
Great advice. And that actually leads perfectly into Hussein's question, where, he is talking about family offices that invest in VC. And so, what are some of the key variables that are critical? And is it really causes that they're passionate about, similar to philanthropy? Because I've heard you say you don't think families should be investing in VC, but what are your thoughts in today's environment on family venture?
Unless you made your money in venture capital and that's your full-time thing, you
Yeah,
should not be focused on venture capital. It's a lucrative asset class if you're in the top decile or top quartile, but it's a very, very hard asset class. And unless you do it full time or have a full-time people who have been in the venture capital community, you need to outsource that more so than even private equity or real estate. Venture is the hardest asset class to invest in.
Do you feel that that's where finding really great venture fund managers is a good partnership?
I think that many of the family offices, the best way to go in them to do a direct venture
Yeah,
deal is is crazy. I mean,
yeah,
unless you made your money in that way and you know the industry, you know that inside out. To go direct in an early stage company, I mean, the model for these early stage companies is 6 out of 10 will go to zero. You get one or two singles or doubles, and hopefully you have a home run, which gives you 3x for the fund. That's kind of the model. So
yeah,
if the top people in the country are saying 6 out of 10 are going to go to zero, why would you even contemplate trying to do it yourself?
yeah. Good point. Well, I'm excited. This is a great question from Mike. Given technology is allowing for the fractionalization of certain services, thereby paving the way for unique collaborations or partnerships, do you believe we'll see a trend where single family offices emerge with less capital because of the cost reductions these collaborations afford them?
No, I think you're gonna see the large single family offices are gonna get bigger. Because
Mhm.
again, it objective, if you have the right team, if you've got the right governance structure, if you've got the right succession plan, if you've got the right compensation model, and if you got all of these things right, it is a better model. It just only very few families do. But if you do have everything right, so I think the big firms are going to continue to get bigger. David Rubenstein's got a very successful family office. The Pritzkers have a very successful office. The Crowns have a very successful family office. There's a lot of very successful family offices, but this has been thought out very carefully, not just I'm going to invest in this deal because my friend's investing in it.
Right. So Thomas asks us, are family offices fee sensitive beyond direct deals, private equity and venture capital? What are families doing for asset allocation, marketable securities? I know there's no
The answer to the first question is yes, they are very fee sensitive. And typically, look, let's say there's a fund that's going to raise $100 million, what we will do and what other family offices will do is they'll come in and say, we'll give you $50 million. Now, if you're going to give them half of the funding, you're going to get better economics, right? So you're going to take part of the GP, you're going to have, lower fees, et cetera. So I think what happens is when family offices come in and they take, usually you need it to be at least 25%, sometimes a little bit more, but say 25 to 30%. If they're going to be that big of a component of it, they're going to get better economics. So the answer is yes, they're very, very fee sensitive. Sometimes it doesn't make they're penny wise and dollar dumb. But I think in general they're very conscious of fees.
Okay. Tim asks us, as family offices evolve and make more direct investments, how will that impact PE fundraising and returns, as many family offices are LPs in PE funds?
It's a great question. What's interesting is if you do we've analyzed this. I one of there was a family office that probably shouldn't be a family office. And they called me and said they have because of connections, they can get KKR requires like a $25 million minimum to get in their fund. Because of who they know, they can get in for 5 million or something like that. Well, the big funds, that's not where you're creating alpha. You're creating alpha usually between the 200 million to $1 billion. That's really where alpha is created. But these funds, because the money is so big with AUM, what's happened is, and again, I'm generalizing, And I've
Mhm.
made a lot of money in private equity myself. So I'm not saying it's not true for the whole industry, but from a macro standpoint, a lot of the private equity for it's become an AUM game. And if you think about it, and I think I'd mentioned this on a podcast I did recently. I had a friend who did a roll up of logistics companies, and he needed $150 million. And the placement agent, he had a phenomenal track record. Placement agent was able to get him 500 million and was super excited, and that's how they're compensated. My friend said, "Okay, I just need 150 and let's get started." The placement agent comes to his apartment in New York, and this could only happen in New York, um, and writes down 2% of 500 million equals X, 2% of 150 million equals Y. What am I missing? And my friend, who is smart and a bit incredulous, said, "What you're missing is if I do what you want me to do, there won't be a fund two because I can't deploy that other 350 efficiently. I can deploy
Yeah,
only 150." That's a
yeah,
microcosm of the industry we're in today. It's become an AUM game. The funds are getting too big, and if you do the math, 2% of a $5 billion fund every single year as an annuity is a big number. And it also forces these funds to invest in to they've got two options. Either they could or invest or give the money back. They've never given the money back, so they're going to invest. And what happens is sometimes, as we saw like in 18 and 19, they were investing. We were going to look to take over by companies, and a private equity firm paid 2x. It's like, I love the company, but it's just not worth that much money. They have that much capital. They have that kind of dry powder. So they're obligated to place it. They could, like I said, they could give it back. Typically they don't. And again, that's a problem with the industry. I think that's going to change. Um, and I think family offices are starting to get to that.
awesome. Richard asks about how to get started with a multifamily office to provide the soft stuff to member families. The people stuff is where the challenge is. Who has the attributes to lead the investing? Who could take over the leadership roles when needed, etc. As a business, family offices need effective productivity, different for each one. There's so much more to the human side of the family office arena.
No, that's a great question. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing. It's not so much that families get the investment side wrong, which sometimes they do. Um, there's not a playbook, right? I mean, and remember, in the late 1800s, in the US, the first family office was probably Rockefeller and Vanderbilt, late 1800s. It took, decades to build wealth. With the internet right now, you can create an app and all of a sudden be a billionaire. And if you look at like my generation versus my daughters, I would
Yeah.
argue there's been a bigger change from my generation to my 21 and 24-year-old daughters than any generation going back even to the Industrial Revolution. Because again, at Stanford, one of the professors gave a speech at a conference I spoke at, and he had a picture of a fire, a picture of a wheel, the word internet, and the word blockchain. And he's like, this is how transformative this is going to become. So I just think that, and now with AI, again, we're in the very first inning. We're with AI, we're at the internet was in 1995. And to me, it's going to be fascinating. I mean, I think there's going to be bad actors, unfortunately, because there always are. But
Mhm.
the positives are like in healthcare. I mean, the amount of diseases that we're going to be able to cure because of AI and the knowledge is phenomenal. So it's it's very exciting, but I do think we're again with AI, we're at the point where it's look 1995 in the internet.
It's exciting. It's like the Wild West, which brings us to Kevin's question, which is exciting about the future. Are you seeing an increase in interest for Bitcoin as an alternative to gold?
I never invested in Bitcoin, and partially because every time I was in would somebody would present Bitcoin, they'd say, "Dude," uh, and then they'd start the presentation, and
Like you lost me.
I never. Now, a lot of young people made a lot of money. I didn't,
Right.
and
Right.
a lot of young people will probably continue to make a lot of money, and I won't. But I think that it with Bitcoin, it's interesting because as it gets larger, the chances of it going to zero become lower and lower. So I think as it's at 100,000, when it gets to 200,000, the potential. So I think it will become more institutionalized. I think you'll see more people. It's not just gonna be the 22-year-old kids who call me dude and say I should invest.
I love that. Okay, well, I wish I'm going to have to send your team. There are so many questions. There's never enough time. I'm going to make one more question, and then yes, I'll send your team. So hopefully you guys that we didn't get to can get answers. But are there any stories? This will be our last one. Are there any stories about family office success with cannabis or spirits?
Yeah, I mean, there's um, in cannabis. There's been some very successful a good friend of mine, Pete Cadence, is a founder of Green Thumb, and they were the first ones to go public, and they did extraordinarily well in cannabis. I think right now it's a very challenging market. With spirits also, again, um, there's always ways to make money in anything, but it's a very challenging market. There's with that. So I think you've got some headwinds with it right now. So the answer is yes, but not that many.
Awesome. Well, everyone who participated, Ron, I mean, this was just an incredible hour. From the number of questions, we could have gone for 2 hours, but I can't thank you enough for being here and thanking everyone for their participation. It was really an engaging conversation. Every time I listen to you, I always learn something new, and I think that speaks to the rate at which the sector is evolving.
Well, thank you, and thank you for everything you're doing for the community.
Oh, absolutely. So, Ron, before we wrap up, what is the best way for people to connect with you online and to, learn more about what you're doing?
Call Cody.
Yeah, I love it. You're like, no,
FamilyOfficeWorldPodcast.com.
awesome. And I love it. I mean, I listen to it. My children know you, and they are going to know so much about family offices through your podcast. Um, I've dropped a few links, which I'm sure the chat's going crazy have gotten lost, but there's my LinkedIn URL because I'd love to connect with everyone, continue conversations. And I've also included an exclusive family office list, 20% off promo code. It's exclusive just to the participants of this session, and it's something we're offering through the end of the month. It also comes with a bonus, free access to our registered investment advisor list. And lastly, as a gift for all of you, staying to the end and participating, I'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow, and I'll include the recording and some key details from today's conversation. So
And I'm going to give out Cody's cell, which is
yes,
847. I'm not going to do
I don't know that he would talk to either of us.
it. No, probably not.
But thank you, Ron. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Wishing you all a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.